Mr. President, I'm here this morning very pleased to be at this point where we're talking about consideration of an appropriations package that includes the fiscal year 2020 bills for the subcommittees on Interior, Environment, Commerce, Justice and Science, Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, and the various related agencies. It may be premature to call this a return to regular order, but I think that's kind of what it feels like. I would note that it is the 22nd of October, well past time that we should have finished our appropriations work, but we are advancing with the bills that we had moved through the subcommittees and the full subcommittees, and now moving packages of these to the floor. And I'm pleased that we are here where we have an opportunity to take up these substantive measures that the full committee has addressed with strong bipartisan support. In the case of the Interior and Environment bill, unanimous support for our bill, but then the opportunity to bring the bills to the floor for consideration where other members have an opportunity to debate these appropriations bills, offer amendments, and then advance them through the process. So I'm pleased this morning, particularly pleased, to be able to speak on the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee bill and to be here with my ranking member, Senator Udall. We have worked through this subcommittee account now for several years. It has been a good partnership, a strong partnership with our teams working side by side. It's not the easiest of bills. We get our fair share of controversy in addition to taking care of all of our public lands. We also have oversight of our native peoples. We also have oversight of the EPA. So we've got a range of subject matter that sometimes can bring us together and sometimes causes some bumps along the way. But what we have committed to do, working collaboratively, working together, I think has resulted in a good, strong measure that the Senate now sees before it. Last year was the first time since FY2010, since 2010, so 9 years now, that the Interior, Environment, and related agencies appropriations was brought before the full Senate. So we've been in a situation where for years we've kind of been at the tail end of the line, the last of those spending bills to move, and now we're debating it in the first package. So we really feel like we've kind of arrived here. But again, you don't arrive here as part of the first package without a great deal of work. You don't do that and receive unanimous support coming out of the committee for the second year in a row now if we hadn't demonstrated this strong commitment that both sides have made to create an environment where we can work through these issues in a bipartisan manner. The Interior, Environment, and related agencies portion of this minibus includes funding for all of the major federal land management agencies. So this is the National Park Service, this is the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency. We also provide funding for essential Indian health, education, and resource management programs through the BIA and the Indian Health Service. And then we also provide funding and oversight for important cultural institutions like the Smithsonian Institution, our National Galleries of Art, and the National Endowment for the Arts and the Humanities. Often this aspect of our oversight is kind of forgotten because it doesn't necessarily fit in with the public lands, with EPA, with BIA, but it is an important and an integral part of our subcommittee's work. Our subcommittee's allocation for FY2020 is $35.8 billion. This is $248 million more than last year, with an additional $2.25 billion that was made available by the Wildfire Cap Adjustment, and I'll speak to the Wildfire Cap issue a little bit later here. But similar to the approach that we took in FY19, the bill rejects the proposed budget decreases. We make investments in our highest priorities, such as infrastructure investments for our land management agencies, Indian country, and wastewater and drinking water improvements. The Department of Interior itself is funded at $13.7 billion. These funds go to support energy development that is critical to our nation's economy, to recreation activities that power our rural communities, and conservation efforts to protect our public lands and the wildlife that rely on them. Funding is provided to support an all-of-the-above energy approach, both onshore and offshore, that will continue to help our country achieve energy independence. On the conservation front, investments in grants programs for species protections, wetlands conservation, to combat wildlife trafficking are included. We also took a keen focus at some of the invasive species that are wreaking havoc in certain of our regions, like the Asian carp. So we've provided a lot of good focus there. With our parks, Americans love to love our national parks. This bill provides the funds necessary to meet our responsibility at the national park units, but we also focus on the deferred maintenance, something that we have talked a lot about in committee and here on the floor. We invest $127 million for deferred maintenance. We also increase funding for historic preservation, which is critical to preserving the sites and the stories of our nation. The USGS, the United States Geological Survey, receives funding for important programs that help our emergency responders, whether it is natural disasters like earthquakes, tsunamis, but we work within this bill to provide assistance for response to natural hazards and disasters, as well as inform the public. In my state of Alaska, support for earthquake hazards programs helps us as a state that is very seismically prone, but it helps with warning, but it helps to enhance earthquake monitoring capability. The bill also maintains funding for mapping initiatives that will help gather data to improve our maps, enhancing the safety of activities such as aviation. In certain parts of the country, believe it or not, we do not have current and accurate mapping, certainly in my home state, but I know in other parts of the country, the updates to the maps simply have not been made. On other lands matters, we also fully fund PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. This is estimated at $500 million, but it maintains our commitment to meeting the needs of local communities for county roads, public safety, and for schools. I know that many of us in this chamber hear from our constituents about the significance of adequate PILT funding. Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is something that is near and dear to many in this body, and you will see in this bill an increase to the LWCF, which receives $465 million. This is $30 million above the enacted level. This also includes $140 million for the NPS stateside program, as well as additional funding for recreational access. So we're focusing on how we are able to access our treasured lands and to ensure that we have a level of conservation that is supported across the country. I think it's important, certainly important for me, but in working with Senator Udall over these years, it has been a great partnership, a strong partnership when it comes to trying to meet the needs of those within Indian country, to fund the critical services. And with this bill, I think we're making good measure to do that. The two primary agencies that deliver services for the Indian community are the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service. Together, they receive a combined increase of $288 million over the 2019 levels, but we maintain all critical program funding with some important increases for Indian country. For the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, we maintain the substantial increases that we've provided over the last 2 fiscal years. We're helping on matters such as construction, operation, and maintenance of Indian schools. We know, unfortunately, that our schools in so many of the reservations in the lower 48 are simply inadequate. The education scores that we're seeing from our schools are not where we need to be. So making sure that we're doing right by our Native children around the country is so important when it comes to the education. We also include funding for irrigation systems. We also fully fund contract support costs. We increase funding for public safety and justice construction and programs, which certainly, as I hear from folks in Alaska and those around Indian country in the lower 48, public safety is something where, again, we are not doing right by those that we must serve in these areas. And this is an effort that I intend to continue to push going forward. I'd specifically like to point out to my colleagues that we include, for the very first time, a comprehensive look at, with new funding, for those issues related to murdered and missing Indigenous women. We have, many of us have been shocked at what we're coming to understand about the murdered and missing of our Native women around the country. And the data that we have, we know, is lacking. We don't know what we don't know, and thus oftentimes it is difficult to address and to respond and to address resources. But the fact is that many who live in tribal communities are often located in rural areas that lack public safety. And even though you've got high rates of violence, abuse, murder, trafficking, we simply don't have the resources there to help respond to it. So I've been working with several of my colleagues to address these challenges, working with Senator Udall, Senator Hoeven, so many, Senator Daines, to shine a light in this area. We know it's going to take a lot of coordination and communication among law enforcement agencies to get this right. But in this bill, we include $6.5 million for cold case investigations, equipment, training, background checks, and the necessary report language to move us in the right direction. Attorney General Barr came to the state of Alaska in May, had an opportunity to sit in Anchorage, listen to statewide leaders, Native leaders, law enforcement, then to get out to the rural areas, into the villages. And after he left, he declared an emergency, a public safety emergency in the state of Alaska because of where we sit. So we've been working with the Attorney General, greatly appreciate his efforts there, but we need to do more through this appropriations to look specifically at these issues as well. For the Indian Health Service, there's also programs that we have an obligation to fund that are vital to Indian country, and many of these programs and the costs associated with them have grown since we enacted the 2019 bill. Among these are leasing and staffing costs associated with new healthcare facilities that are operated by IHS or by tribes under compact agreements. So our bill funds these new increases. We also provide additional funding for recruitment and quality improvement, as well as a $24 million increase for facilities, including an increase for medical equipment. The Forest Service. Forest Service receives investment in funding for improved health and management of our nation's forests, including for recreation assets such as the cabins that so many of us enjoy, the trails that we hike on, and recreation special use permitting to allow certain businesses to operate in our national forests to enhance the many recreational experiences and opportunities. I mentioned at the beginning of my comments the Wildfire Cap Adjustment. It was back in the 2018 omnibus that we created the Wildland Fire Cap Adjustment, and FY2020 is the first year that this is now available. So the bill invests $1.67 billion in wildland fire activities, including $2.25 billion in fire cap adjustment funding. We have certainly seen in my state this summer intense and extensive fires It was a record-breaking heat year this summer, and we had some pretty devastating fires. We're still talking about the fires from California just last year. We know the threat is real. We know we have to respond. And so making sure we have the capacity to fight fire is important. In this bill, we not only invest in fire suppression, we also invest in state and volunteer fire assistance, and we provide increases for hazardous fuels reductions. As far as the EPA budget goes, we prioritize funding for the programs that result in concrete actions to improve the quality of the environment across our country. The bill provides significant increases in state and tribal grant programs, which will lead to tangible, on-the-ground cleanup and environmental benefits. Another priority that was strongly supported by many in this chamber are on-the-ground cleanup and environmental benefits. The priority that is targeted by many in the water space is the water infrastructure development. Many of the newly authorized programs in America's Water Infrastructure Act are funded for the first time in this measure. Funding is also provided for the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds and the WIFIA program to build and support critical water infrastructure in communities in every state. The bill also equips the EPA with a powerful set of tools to further the agency's core missions of clean air, clean water, and clean land. One of the issues that I hear a lot about from folks back home, as well as from my colleagues here in the Senate, is the issue of PFAS and PFAS contamination. So in this bill, we have provided $25 million in increases to address PFAS, including new funding for state-led cleanup and remediation efforts. We also focus on research on the human health and environmental impacts and related priority regulatory actions. $20 million in increases are provided for EPA grant programs to support states in their cleanup and their remediation efforts of PFAS-contaminated water sources, as well as the water systems and the lands. The remaining $5 million in increases will support EPA's priority actions on PFAS and supplement the research that other agencies are currently conducting on the chemicals. So we heard the concerns of so many, and we've really worked to respond in this measure. And then lastly, the bill includes important increases for our cultural institutions and our agencies, the Smithsonian Institution, the Gallery of Art, the National Endowment for the Arts and the Humanities all receive increases in our measure. I think it is so important to make sure that when we think about our treasures, clearly our land, the cleanliness of our water, but we also have national treasures, and we see so much of that reflected in the arts, whether it's the Smithsonian's, the galleries, or what the Endowment for the Arts and the Humanities do. Consistent with FY19, we do not include new policy provisions that were not enacted, that were not in the enacted bill. So we've worked with Chairman Shelby, Vice Chairman Leahy, and the ranking member, again with Senator Udall, to assemble a package that both sides supported in committee. Again, I want to reiterate that the work that Senator Udall and I put in to produce a bipartisan product that invests in programs that we care about, programs that protect our land and our people, enable infrastructure projects to boost the economy, help communities, provide vital basic services that many might take for granted. We also worked hard to shape this bill so that it reflects the priorities of members on both sides of the aisle. I'm proud, I'm really very proud of the good bipartisan work to ensure that this Interior Appropriations bill directs the federal resources to where they're needed most, providing critical investments in communities across the nation. And of course, this Interior bill is just a part of this package. We've also got CJS, Ag, THUD. All of these have significant impacts across the country. Certainly in my home state, we're looking at the CJS bill to help keep our fisheries healthy, provide assistance for public safety programs. In the Ag bill, there is funding for much-needed water infrastructure in our villages, helps expand our ever-growing agricultural industries. And then, of course, THUD makes sure that rural communities in my state can still receive things like essential air service, helping with our ferry transportation system, help provide travel housing. There's so much good in all of these measures. I would commend them to members' consideration, but would certainly urge passage of this very important appropriations bill, and pleased to be here with my colleague, the good senator from New Mexico.